am a Yank in Sussex. Far, far away in easternmost East Sussex lies the ancient town of Rye. You can't get much further east in East Sussex without wandering into Kent. Rye has been a village or a town going back for a really, really long time, well before 1066 and the Norman invasion. It was undoubtedly an important port even in Norman times due to the safe anchorage provided by the huge Rother embayment I'll describe in a bit. After the withdrawal of Rome and the influx of the West Germanic tribes, the predominant inhabitants were probably Jutes, but it was part of the Saxon manor of Ramessley, and was given to the Benedictine Abbey of Fécamp in Normandy by King Ethelred around 1000 AD. The wife and I stayed a couple of nights in Rye for one of our wedding anniversaries, just before one of the virus lockdowns. I confessed I had never heard of this town before coming to England in 2017. Knowing nothing, I thought at first that rye was named for the grain called rye, thinking it might be because it was an important crop in the area, but this turned out to be incorrect. Historically, one of the most important crops in the area is actually hops. They're used primarily as a bittering, flavoring, and stability agent in beer, to which, in addition to bitterness, they apparently impart floral, fruity, or citrus flavors and aromas, or so I understand it anyway. You can easily see the influence of hops in the area because of the many traditional hop drying buildings called oast houses that can be found in the area. These oast houses, or hop kilns, are quite distinctive, many with cone-shaped roofs, having wind vane-directed vents designed to turn and maximize the draft of the drying hops, as well as to keep the rain out. Since this traditional method of hop drying has been largely replaced by more modern industrialized methods, many oast houses have been converted to private residences or even hotels. Well, if Rye is not named for the grain, why is this town called Rye? As one might expect, the name of Rye has evolved from an old language. The language authorities are not totally in agreement as to its origin, but the larger scholarly consensus is that it comes from the West Saxon Eeg, meaning island. I don't quite follow how Eeg could turn into Rye, but stranger things have happened after 1,000 years of language evolution. Why would Rye be called an island, though? The town lies 2 miles, or 3 kilometers, from the sea at the confluence of 3 rivers, the Rother, the Tillingham, and the Brede. It sits on a bluff that rises up to 100 feet above the general level of the surrounding ground, but it isn't at all surrounded by water. But 1,000 years ago, things were different. Dating from even before Roman times, Rye was an island that rose from a large embayment of the English Channel. These days, the Dungeness Headland is a large triangular peninsula that juts out into the channel. But 10 centuries ago, Dungeness was just a spit, or a system of spits, of sandy shingle that protected a large sheltered body of shallow water suitable for sheltering ships from the storms. But time and erosion, along with deliberate inning or damming, turned this once sheltered harbor into solid ground. Before that happened, however, Rye was a port town belonging to the important Confederation of Cinque Ports. What are the Cinque Ports? Without getting into too much detail, as this would lead to this video being much longer than I have time for, it was a confederation of commerce of great age that played a significant role in Rye's history and that of all of southeast England. These days, while the Confederation of Cinque Ports remains in existence, its function has become entirely ceremonial. The Cinque Ports are located on the eastern end of the English Channel, where the crossing to the continent is narrowest. The 5 ports, that's the reason for Cinque, it's French, were originally Hastings, New Romney, Hythe, Dover, and Sandwich. There were 2 associated ports called the Ancient Towns, which were Rye and Winchelsea. These 2 ports had high status within the Confederation, though not at first the highest. Rye's status was later enhanced to be a full member after sudden changes in the Dungeness Headland, and the embayment ended New Romney's abilities to service cargoes. This is why the Cinque Ports Confederation figures large in Rye's history. What old English town couldn't be improved by having fortifications and 1 or more castles? I know, right? And Rye has them in spades. Back when it was a fully functioning harbour, situated on the south coast of England where the English Channel is at its narrowest, Rye was often one of the first ports of call for commerce sailing across from continental Europe. But because of this, it was also one of the first ports of call for armed intruders, along with Dover. The French regularly attacked or raided Rye, and even the Spanish did on occasion. Some attacks were worse than others. In 1377, a French assault resulted in the complete destruction of Rye by fire. The bells from St. Mary's Church were stolen on this occasion and taken to France. But the men of Rye and neighbouring Winchelsea didn't take this lying down, however. They gathered their forces and set sail for France. The retaliation was fruitful. Besides returning with the stolen bells, they also recovered an assortment of other goods that had been stolen in previous French attacks. The first built castle at Rye dates from the 14th century. It was first mentioned in the 1200s as a proposal, but actual construction first began in 1329. It was originally called Badding's Tower, but it was bought 100 years later by a man named John de Ypres in 1430. That's my guess at how he pronounced his name, but as the family name is clearly of Norman French origin, and I think we can assume his family originally hailed from the town now spelled Ypres in modern Belgium, we might be tempted to pronounce it Ypres. Mais non, mon ami. If this tower were in Ypres, in Belgium, that's how we'd say it, Le Tour Ypres. But this is England, and the local pronunciation here in Rye is Eeps. This is Eeps Tower. The structure looks like the classic castle imagined by many, having a square plan with round towers at each corner. It's been used for many purposes. First, of course, for the defense of the town of Rye, then as a prison, and later it was the town morgue. Today, however, it's one of the two sites of the Rye Castle Museum. It is a Grade 1 listed building and contains exhibits including locally made medieval pottery and embroidery depicting many aspects of Rye life and history, medieval artifacts such as weaponry, local activities, and town maps. The second part of the Rye Castle Museum is actually located in a different building, a former brewer's bottling factory, just down the street. Besides Eeps Tower, by 1449, Rye's fortifications consisted of a town wall and 4 gates: the Land Gate, Strand Gate, Badding's Gate, and Postern Gate. After their completion, the French did invade again, once more setting fire to buildings, but because of the new fortifications, the degree of destruction was not as great as before. Further modernization of Rye's defenses occurred in the 15th and 16th centuries, but today the only remnant of Rye's fortifications is the one remaining gate, the Land Gate. A later part of the defenses of the Rye port was Camber Castle, located 3/4 of a mile due south of Rye. Due to concern for hostilities with, as usual, France, King Henry VIII ordered the building of an artillery platform a bit south of Rye to defend the Camber anchorage. This was accomplished in 1515 by Edward Guildefort, and it came to be called Camber Castle, named after the now disappeared Camber anchorage. There are 2 Martello Towers near Rye. One is in the village of Rye Harbour and is accessible to the public. Well, you can't actually enter it, but you can walk around it. The other one is located on private property closer to the town itself and isn't accessible to the public. Martello Towers, sometimes known simply as Martellos, are small defensive forts that were built across the British Empire during the 19th century, from the time of the French Revolutionary Wars onwards. Most were coastal forts. Why are these called Martello Towers? They were inspired by a round fortress, part of a larger Genoese defense system at Mortella Point in Corsica, hence the name. They stand up to 40 feet high, with 2 floors, and typically had a garrison of 1 officer and 15 to 25 men. Their round structure and thick walls of solid masonry made them resistant to cannon fire, while their height made them an ideal platform for a single heavy artillery piece, which was mounted on the flat roof and able to traverse and hence fire over a complete 360-degree circle. A few towers had moats or other batteries, and works attached for extra defense. As you can see, the Martello Tower at Rye Harbour is one of those with a large moat, as well as a surrounding berm. Southeast England was dotted with these towers, most still standing with some now in private hands. These towers became obsolete after the widespread adoption of powerful rifled artillery. What's in Rye to see? There's the more modern town, which is the larger and more populated portion, and that looks like every other town or village in Sussex, but of particular interest to me at least is the central ancient core. The buildings here on the former island of Rye include some very old structure going back over 500 years. Just before the onset of the pandemic, the British bride and I stayed at one of the most picturesque inns in Sussex, called the Mermaid Inn. The current building dates from 1420 and has 16th century additions in the Tudor style, but cellars built in 1156 survive, which is believed to be the year that the original inn was built. The inn has a strong connection with the notorious Hawkhurst gang of smugglers, who used it in the 1730s and 40s as one of their strongholds. Rye was a thriving port during this period of time. Some of the smugglers, their mistresses, and other characters are reported to haunt the inn, and many guests have reported very frightening experiences. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, Wendy and I did not experience any haunting when we stayed there. Perhaps we were in an unhaunted room. The inn has been very popular at every time in its history, but between 1550 and 1570 there were some very particular celebrations organized by the town fathers, and Queen Elizabeth I was known to have stayed at the Mermaid Inn when she visited the town. We asked if the room we stayed in was one of her rooms, but unfortunately this isn't known. The inn ceased functioning as an inn starting around 1770, and for about 150 years was used as a private residence or as a club, until it again took up innkeeping duties after World War II. On another street in the old town is another inn, called the Olde Bell Inn, which is also quite ancient. It was built in 1390, and like the Mermaid, it has a turbulent history, being also once used for smuggling. Just one street over, it has a literal connection with the Mermaid Inn, since the Hawkhurst gang used both premises as gathering places. The gang apparently had underground passages dug between the two inns, so that if law enforcement were to try to waylay them in one place, they could escape to the other. I find it refreshing and uplifting to visit houses of worship wherever I go, and Rye has a couple of great churches. Due to Rye's past importance and prosperity, there is a large Anglican church here, St. Mary's. This church is quite large and prominent, and deserves its very own video in order to do it justice, but this brief segment will have to do. The estate of Rye had been held by the Abbey of Fécamp in Normandy for a long time as a royal deed of gift, dating from even before the Norman conquest. And because Fécamp was an important sponsor of William the Conqueror's invasion, this status was reconfirmed after the Battle of Hastings. The status ended in 1247, but until this relationship ended, the profit for the parish had been so great that a large church could be built, which was called the Cathedral of East Sussex until recent times. It was never an actual cathedral, but its size and grandeur gave it that reputation. The church has had many changes over the centuries, including a complete reconstruction due to the French raid mentioned earlier. The building is a Grade 1 listed building, and like many other churches, is cruciform in layout, meaning it looks like a cross from the air. The current building dates from the late 12th century, when its chancel, crossing, transepts, and the nave were built. Flying buttresses were added to the southeast end of the chancel in the 15th century. In 1742, the churchyard was the site of a crime. The butcher John Breeds, intending to kill the town mayor because he was interfering with Breed's illicit activities, instead accidentally murdered a man named Alan Grebel. Breeds was hanged and gibbeted for his crime. His skull, which is the only remains of him, is apparently still kept in the town hall. Both Breeds and his victim are still said to haunt the churchyard. A good place to stay away from at night, I'd guess. A much newer church, but still architecturally attractive, is the St. Anthony of Padua Church. This one is a Roman Catholic parish church constructed from 1927 to 1929 to replace a smaller church built in 1900 dedicated to St. Walpurga. It's situated on Watch Bell Street to the south of Lamb House. It is a Grade 2 listed building. As a prominent town, many famous people have lived in Rye over the years. I was interested to discover that among them was the comedian, writer, musician, poet, and playwright Spike Milligan, whom I remember from his memoirs of World War II. Also included are the famed painter J.M.W. Turner, who did many drawings and paintings of the town and its coastline, and Paul and Linda McCartney, who settled in Rye for a time after the Beatles broke up. Their children, James, also a musician and songwriter, Mary, and Stella, lived here and were educated at Rye College. Rye is a brilliant town and well worth a visit. There's much to see here, especially if you are interested in history and old buildings. When my wife and I visited Rye, we stayed at the extremely picturesque Mermaid Inn, which we recommend, but there are other inns in the town that are probably just as welcoming and comfortable. I would like to give special credit to the YouTube channel Mr. Swain 9415, link in the description, for permission to use his drone footage of Rye and Camber Castle in this video. It provided an excellent backdrop for what I had to say. Thank you very much. This has been a production of A Yank in Sussex. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe or follow. Thanks for watching, and may you have a very nice day.